So this short video is about using EVAAS projections to personalize learning, and this is for our personalized community of practice. So our first question to ponder is, what is curriculum? So in looking this up, Wikipedia has a dozen or so different definitions that it offers from various scholars, but to introduce those, it states that there is generally no agreed upon definition of curriculum. The origin of the word itself is Latin, and it means race course. Of course, when the Greeks used this term, essentially a curriculum represented a purposeful progression towards some predetermined goal. It did not, however, mean that it's the best way to plot the full extent of the content that we want our students to learn onto some sort of a course or pacing guide so that we may race through it. So in defining curriculum, we should first decide what the purpose of the curriculum is. And on education.com, I found an article titled Defining Curriculum, and it states that curriculum refers to the means and materials with which students will interact for the purpose of achieving identified educational outcomes. So when we first decide what those outcomes are, what are the things that we want students to learn, then the curriculum represents anything that we use to help those students learn those things. It tells us, though, that we should keep in mind the curriculum is only that part of the plan that directly affects the students. Anything in the plan that does not reach the students constitutes an educational wish, but not a curriculum. Curriculum, however grand the plans may be, can only be that portion of the plan that actually reaches the students. So, if our institutionalized curriculum represents 20 or 30 standards, but at the end of the day, or at the end of the year, we're helping students to find mastery in a dozen of those standards or less, 6 of those standards, then the curriculum is represented by anything that helped us to gain mastery for those students in those specific. So if curriculum is a race course and everyone's running their own race, let's imagine this girl in the front is about to win this race. Now, her success completely depends on us, and the way she imagines her success completely depends on us. And this girl, second to last, way in the back, is clearly so far behind, she'll never catch this girl in the front. But again, her success depends on the goals we've set for her during this race. So this girl in the front, if her goal was 22 seconds and she finishes the race in 23 seconds, then her conversation with her coach and her feelings about her success of this race are going to be a little different than this girl in the back if her goal was 31 seconds and she runs the race in 30. So a picture like this is very hard to find, running from behind. But I want you to think about our struggling students, and a lot of the time this is what they see. They see everyone else so far ahead of them. What keeps their legs churning forward? What keeps them running at their hardest? What could create a situation where they really want to finish this race even though all of these other people are in front of them? And the only thing that will do it is that they have a goal in mind, that they're racing against their own personal goals in their own personal time. And these people in front of them mean nothing, and all these people in the stands mean nothing. So each student is running a race against his or her own previous best time in distance. That's what EVAAS projections give us. They help us give each student's individual time and distance to beat. They also provide us with a readiness level. So how would you define readiness? So dictionary.com defines readiness as the state of being fully prepared for something. So if we're teaching a student a specific standard and they aren't ready to learn that standard, then it's going to be useless. Or if we're teaching them a standard that they've already learned, then I guess there's no point in that either. So although we're going to be talking about EVAAS projections, I want to be very clear, this is not a numbers game. It's going to feel like it a little bit here and there. It's going to feel like we're trying to manipulate this test by the numbers. That's not the case at all. This is about prioritizing skills. This is not only about readying kids for a state assessment, although it is about readying kids for a state assessment. That's the world we live in right now. But it's as much about readying kids for the next grade level and the life beyond. So if we take what we're about to talk about and the state assessment goes away, it all still applies. So let's talk a little bit about EVAAS projections. I'm going to give you a little background. If you already know everything there is to know about EVAAS projections, sit tight. This will only take a minute. Otherwise, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what they are. So what we're going to do is create a custom student report. You log into this website and you can do it. It's pretty self-explanatory. So this is what a custom student report looks like. I pulled up Kaiser's 7th grade. I hid the students' names. What we're looking for is this projected state percentile in the far right column. So 53 represents the percentage of kids that student TGKZ is projected to score higher than across the entire state. So they should do better than 53% of the kids that take the 7th grade EOG. Now, that said, if student TGKZ scores higher than 53 or higher than the 53rd percentile, then the state will recognize that that student has exceeded expected growth. And if every one of your students scores higher than their projection, then your value-added data will show that you have exceeded expected growth. So let's get a look at an individual projection report. This is Shalina's projection report. She's projected in the 89th percentile. So the red dots, if this were a live report, we could hover over them and they'd show you her state percentiles for her 3rd grade reading EOG beginning of the year and her 3rd grade end of the year reading EOG. And then that yellow square represents what she's projected to do on her 4th grade reading EOG. Again, if she scores better than that, then she's exceeded expected growth. She's expected to do or projected to do better than 89% of the kids that take the test across the state. And now we have another projection report, and this is Ben. Ben and Shalina are in the same class. Ben's projected in the 16th percentile. So what they're ready for, what they can do walking into 4th grade, the skills that they have and the understandings that they have about language arts are very different. They have very different understanding. So quick question, who should get the easiest question on a test? If we were to give a benchmark to all of our students, knowing that they come ready for different amounts of material, who should get the easiest question correct? Let's say that on this benchmark there are 50 questions and everyone believes, and everybody's easy and hard is different, but let's say there's one question that everyone believes is the easiest on the test. If you think everyone should get it correct and 90% of their kids do, then maybe that's not good enough. Maybe if 10% get it wrong, we need to find those 10%. We need to figure out why they got it wrong. And if it was that they blew it off or there was some misunderstanding, we need to figure out a way to make sure that they've mastered that skill so that next time something like that comes along, they will be able to get it right. That said, who should get the hardest question on the test correct? If we think that there's only 10% of the kids that are projected at such a high level that the hardest question on the test, only those 10% should get it right, then when 90% of the kids get a question wrong, we shouldn't panic and reteach and figure out what, and apply it to a specific standard and see what why that 90% of kids got it wrong. We should be satisfied that the correct 10 kids got that question correct and we move on. This is a school diagnostic. This is another report available from SAS and from EVAAS. So what this tells us is it puts the kids into 5 buckets, essentially. It takes the kids that are predicted to do the lowest and predicted to do the highest, and then 3 sort of in-between buckets there, or groups of kids. Now, this is called a 10 pattern, and this is what we see when a steering group is the decisions for what we should teach and show the kids are made based on the steering group, or what we call teaching to the middle. So we had a bunch of high kids in the class, we had a bunch of low. So what we did was we narrowed our focus to the middle, and we left behind the Shalinas and we left behind the Bens. We didn't get to the higher material that Shalina needed, and we moved so quickly that Ben wasn't able to master the things that he needed. We glazed over the stuff he needed. This is an ideal report. This is what you want to see, that the lowest group scored the highest or made the most growth, and that the highest group, although they made growth, it wasn't nearly as much as the lowest group, and this is what will eventually obliterate the achievement gap. So let's say we took our kids and we put them into our own 4 groups. Anybody projected to score less than the 25th percentile and higher than the 74th for our 2 groups, and then 2 groups in the middle too. And let's say we divvied up the curriculum appropriately, that the 3 standards in 4th grade that we thought were the most foundational in reading and most important for every kid to know and understand were determining meaning and context, summarizing the text, and determining main ideas. We didn't want anyone to leave our class or grade level until they've mastered those standards, right? So we make sure that everybody can master those, or everybody has mastery of those ideas. And then we pick the next most important. And I didn't use all of them. I just chose a few examples. Let's say analyzing how dialogue propels action and the story reveals character is next most important, and so on. And then we move through the curriculum that way, and that leaves Shalina projecting the 89th percentile to be responsible for the entire curriculum, that she's pretty much have to master everything, all of the standards that we present her. But the good news is Shalina walking through the door, because she's projecting an 89th percentile, has already mastered a lot of them. She could take the 4th grade EOG on the first day of 4th grade and do pretty well on it. So we need to get her the material that she needs the most, and we need to make sure she's mastered it. At the same time, Ben doesn't need to move forward with any more difficult material until he's mastered the most foundational ideas. And then the next year, he starts in that next group, and the year after that in the next group, and so on. So I think an important question to ask is, what will it take for my kids to do well on a test that I give them a year from now? Or another way to think about this is, if I give my kids a quiz today, a week from now, how will they do on it? Is their score on this quiz indicative of mastery of standards, or is it memorization and they've prepared well for this test, but these aren't skills that they're carrying on with them through life? So what will it take? What will it take for us to propel kids' mastery of standards to the point where they've got it year after year after year? At the top of the slide, we have all of the assessed standards for 4th grade language arts. Now, if we expose kids to all of them, but never bring them to mastery of any of them, then they're not going to be successful this year on the EOG, or when they show up next year, they're not going to be ready for 5th grade. But if we are very deliberate about which standards that we expose kids to and make sure we bring them to mastery, then they will be successful. This made me think of this cartoon, or the phrase fair is not always equal, and I thought this applied pretty well here. There's another cartoon that I'm sure you've seen before. Here's an old favorite. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Now, that said, we do all have to take the same exam. But just because there are 50 questions that every kid is going to be put in front of every kid doesn't mean all of those 50 questions have to belong to every kid. On each test is designed with something called stretch. There are questions that very few kids will get right, and there are questions that just about every kid will get right. And that's so that we have this spread of percentiles, that we have kids scoring in the 99th percentile and kids scoring in the 1st percentile and everything in between. So when a student is only ready for a certain portion of that test, and they've been exposed to very specific standards, and they understand exactly these are the skills that this test is assessing in me, they're looking for 10 questions, and those 10 questions are theirs, and they're going to own those, and the other 40 they can let slip right by. Or someone like Shalina, projecting the 89th percentile, is looking for 50 questions. She wants to get every single one right that she can, but the good news is there are going to be 10 of those that she really struggled with throughout the year, but we worked hard to make sure she mastered those, and the other 40 were going to be a piece of cake for her on day one of school. It would be very unreasonable of us to hand a bunch of standards over to a student who's not ready for them, and it would be just as unreasonable to hand a bunch of standards over to a student who's already mastered them. So this is where it's going to get it's going to feel like Moneyball a little bit. It's going to feel like a numbers game, but stick with me here. So let's say DPI tells us that each standard is going to be assessed by a specific number of questions on the EOG. So RI 4.1 will be assessed by 3 to 6 questions, and so on. So if we know that a student is projecting the 16th percentile, she'll have to score or get about 22 questions correct in order to land in that percentile. And if a student is projected to score the 90th percentile, he will have to get 40 questions correct. So now what we do is we decide which standards each has already, and we decide which are going to be the ones that are most appropriate for them. Where am I going to get my 40 questions for the little boy, and where am I going to get my 22 for the little girl? What are the standards that are going to mean the most to each of them? And then what I do is I divvy them out appropriately. So he has yet to master 4.8. I'm going to make sure he gets that, because there'll be a few questions on that, and he's going to need them. The same idea with her, that before she goes anywhere near 4.8, I want her to have mastered 4.4, because that's going to be making meaning in context, and that skill is going to be much more important to her in life. And so on. Let's begin by prioritizing our assessed standards. So we take our assessed standards and we lay them all out from the one that we want, 4.4, everyone to have mastered before the end of the school year, and the one that we think is sort of least relevant to the kids, 4.8. So what we understand is that Ben's projected in the 16th percentile. He's going to need 22 questions to get there, and Shalina's projected in the 89th. She's going to need 40 questions. So what we do is we prioritize the first block of standards that we want Ben to have mastered These are foundational to him. These are going to be most important to him before he walks out of here. We assessed early and we found that he hadn't really mastered any of them, so that's going to be his pacing guide for the year, lack of a better term. And Shalina, the same idea. We assessed early and often, and we found a lot of those foundational skills she's already mastered, so we grade those out for her. And the rest, what's left, is those are going to be her priorities, because in the 89th percentile, we want her to have mastered just about everything that's going to be assessed. So this amounts to their learning goals. This is their learning path. Each of them, they've got this block of standards that by the end of the year, we're going to concentrate on making sure they've mastered. And let's say during Unit 5 shows up, we can personalize this a little bit by making sure Ben is working on 4.1, one of his goals, and we can talk more about the E, M, and H that represents the easy, medium, and hard variety, the cognitive complexity of the skill or understanding within the standard. And then Shalina, she's going to be working on the hard variety of 4.8 because that's one of her blocks of standards. And Ben, it's not one of his, so he's not going to be working on it during this unit. So back to the running analogy. There's a common saying among runners that goes, races are the celebration of my training. Well, we have a common complaint in teaching that the EOG, we don't get results until the fall, and it's too late, and they don't break them down to the point where they really give us any information. Well, if we look at it from the other end of things, that if we have a good idea before the kids take the test of exactly which questions we expect them to get correct and which questions we're not even worried if they get right or wrong, then we won't need the results. We won't need the results of the test. The kids can tell us which ones they got right or wrong. And that's only going to come from very specific learning goals. I want to leave you with this question or problem to ponder. How can we build a flexible environment to meet the needs of all of our kids? Because that's what's really in front of us. That if we understand or if we believe or if we agree that our students need very prioritized, personalized learning goals, and their readiness levels are at all different places, then how can we build an environment? How can we design our classroom to meet the needs of all those kids at the same time?